The sun was high in the sky, casting warm rays across the school's football field, where dozens of rows of white folding chairs had been set up. Balloons floated in the breeze, parents waved miniature flags bearing the school logo, and the buzz of excitement pulsed through the air like an electric current. It was graduation day, the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and dreams. Everyone had their phones out, capturing moments, laughter, and anticipation. Among the proud parents stood James "Tank" Holloway, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, dressed in a crisp black suit and deep red tie. His skin was dark and smooth, his posture military perfect, and his gaze never strayed from the stage ahead. It was his son's big day. And he wouldn't miss it for the world. He had arrived early, well before the crowds began to trickle in. Found a good seat with a clear view of the podium. He'd even polished his shoes that morning, which still had the silent scuffs of deserts and jungles ingrained in the leather. Everything about this day had weight. His son, Jordan Holloway, had fought through academic struggles, peer pressure, and life as a black teen in a city that wasn't always kind. And yet, here he was, about to receive a diploma. James felt something swell inside his chest that couldn't be described. Pride was too small a word. This was legacy. This was victory. As people filed in, James didn't mind that no one sat near him at first. He was used to solitude. It was almost comforting. What he wasn't used to, not anymore, was the judgment in certain glances. A few sideways looks from parents who seemed to be assessing if he belonged. A white woman in pearls who clutched her handbag tighter as she walked past. A whispering couple 2 rows down who kept looking his way with narrowed eyes. He'd seen this before, not just in war zones but in grocery stores, bank lines, and airports. It was the kind of tension that you didn't always hear, but could feel on your skin like static before a storm. Still, he kept his focus. His son was due to walk across that stage in less than 20 minutes, and nothing was going to ruin this moment. Or so he thought. The first tap on the shoulder didn't even register as real. It was soft, almost hesitant. James turned to find 2 uniformed security guards standing just behind his seat. They weren't school employees. Private hires, most likely. Their shirts bore the emblem of a local security firm, and their mirrored sunglasses reflected the confusion already rising on James's face. "Sir," the first one said, tone low but firm, "we're going to need you to come with us." James blinked slowly. "Excuse me. This is a private event for families only." "I am family," James said, already hearing the rumble of uncertainty in the pit of his stomach. The second guard stepped forward. "We received a report from another guest. Said you were making people uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable?" James's voice was steady, but laced with disbelief. "I've been sitting here silently for over 30 minutes. Haven't said a word to anyone." "Sir, we understand. But we have to respond to all reports." "I'm a United States Marine," James replied, calmly but clearly. "Retired. That's my son on that stage. I have as much right to be here as anyone else." There was a flicker of hesitation in the first guard's face, but it quickly vanished. "I understand, but we've been asked to escort you off the premises. We can do this quietly, or—" "No," James cut in, rising slowly to his feet. "Let me stop you right there. I didn't serve 20 years, risk my life in 3 different war zones, miss the births of my nieces and nephews, bury my friends, and spend nights shaking from combat nightmares, all for someone to tell me I make people uncomfortable for existing in a public place." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The strength in it commanded attention. And now, the people around them were starting to turn. A few camera phones came up. Parents who had ignored him before were now watching intently, eyes darting from James to the guards and back again. The second guard glanced at his partner, suddenly unsure. The tension in the air had grown dense. The once festive atmosphere seemed to freeze as if the whole crowd had been caught mid-breath. "I'm just doing my job," the first one muttered. "And I did mine," James replied, voice growing colder. "I did my job so well that I watched brothers die just to protect the freedom that lets you stand there and question whether I belong." Still, despite the simmering anger rising inside him, he kept his hands visible, his posture relaxed, his tone controlled. It was a reflex, the learned restraint of a black man in America, especially one built like a tank, confronting authority. The murmurs around him began to grow. Some people were clearly uncomfortable, but not because of James. It was the guards who had drawn the line now. Some audience members whispered to one another. Others reached for their phones, ready to record what might come next. James looked toward the stage again. His son hadn't seen what was happening, yet. He was near the back of the graduate line, chatting with classmates, laughing, full of the excitement of youth and accomplishment. James couldn't bear the thought that Jordan might turn his head and see his father being led away like a trespasser. He turned back to the guards. "So that's it?" he asked, quieter now. "Because of a report from someone too scared or prejudiced to look me in the eye, you're removing a father from his child's graduation. That's your play." The guards hesitated. They weren't expecting this. Weren't prepared to be the center of attention themselves. One of them radioed something under his breath, stepping back slightly as if to shield himself with procedure. And in that moment, standing there under the bright sun, in a field of celebration and color, James Holloway felt something inside him shift. It wasn't the same pain as the battlefield. It wasn't even rage. It was weariness. Deep, soul-tired exhaustion. A question echoed in his mind: what else do I have to do to be seen as worthy? He had survived ambushes, saved lives under fire, mentored dozens of younger soldiers. He had coached his son's football team when no other dads showed up. He paid his taxes. He voted. He kept his record clean. And yet here he was, still not safe enough to be left alone at a school function. And somehow, even though he'd trained for war, nothing in that training prepared him for this kind of fight. The silent kind. The one where you're told, without a word, that your very presence is a threat. His fists clenched at his sides. Not in violence, but from the ache of holding everything in. He wasn't going to give them a reason. Not here. Not today. So he nodded slowly. Took one step away from his seat. That's when the first voice rang out. "You've got the wrong man." It came from behind the rows of chairs. Low, gravelly, but full of authority. Another man stepped forward. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaven head, aviator glasses, charcoal suit. And behind him, 5 more. They walked in a straight line, calm and commanding. Each one different, but all exuding the same unmistakable energy, discipline, strength, purpose. These men didn't move like civilians. They moved like warriors. Eyes began to widen. The guards turned, clearly caught off guard by their presence. James looked up, and in that instant, recognition flooded his face. He knew them, each and every one. SEALs. The very men he'd served with, bled with, and in some cases, saved from death. The same brothers who hadn't forgotten him. The ones who, unlike the crowd, knew who James Holloway truly was. And now, 6 of them had just stepped forward into the crowd, not to watch, not to clap, but to stand for their Marine. Everything else around them seemed to go still. And that's when the silence became deafening. A hush fell over the crowd as the 6 men approached. Their presence cut through the awkward silence like a razor through paper. These weren't ordinary guests. They walked like they owned the ground beneath them, but not with arrogance, with the confidence of men who'd lived through fire and didn't flinch in its return. People began to murmur. The sound moved like a ripple across the rows of seated families, a whisper of questions and guesses. Who were these men? Why were they here? What was going on? James stood frozen in place, still caught in the moment when the guards asked him to leave. But now, his mind was whirling. He hadn't seen these faces in years since the last mission, the last deployment, the last time they bled together in dust and heat. Yet, there they were. 6 shadows from his past, stepping forward into his present, like summoned angels of justice. The lead man removed his sunglasses. His steely eyes met the guards without flinching. His voice was calm but packed with weight. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" The guards looked uncertain. One of them fumbled with the radio clipped to his chest but didn't speak into it. The other glanced at James again, now beginning to doubt himself. The SEAL stepped closer. "This man is Sergeant James Holloway. He dragged me and 2 of my men out of a burning Humvee in Kandahar. His back was torn open by shrapnel, and he still carried one of us on his shoulders 2 clicks to the evac point. While under enemy fire. You want to tell me he doesn't belong here?" James didn't say anything. His jaw was clenched so tightly that his teeth hurt. His hands were still loose at his sides, but his heart thundered against his ribs. He didn't ask for this. Didn't expect this. But deep down, it felt like oxygen, someone else standing up, finally. Another SEAL, a man with a limp and a scar trailing from his ear to the edge of his jawline, stepped forward. I was 22 when I got shot through the leg in Ramadi. He stayed behind when the rest of the squad pulled out. He didn't have to. But he did. He tied a tourniquet, fired off 3 mags of cover, and got me out of there alive. I have a wife and 2 kids now because of him. Gasps began to sound through the crowd. The whispers shifted. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was a confrontation with truth. A woman in the second row put her hand over her mouth. A teenage boy behind her lowered his phone, no longer recording but watching, transfixed. Even the school principal, who had been talking to other staff near the podium, was now walking briskly toward the scene, expression taut with concern. The third SEAL, younger, barely 30, stepped into the growing circle. You people are talking about him like he's a stranger. Like some problem that needs to be removed. You don't know the half of it. This man trained me when I was just a hot-headed recruit who couldn't shoot straight or follow orders. He taught me discipline, how to think under pressure, how to be a man. When my own father died, Sergeant Holloway wrote the eulogy for me. That's the kind of person you tried to embarrass in front of his son. Now the guards looked entirely lost. One stepped back, shifting uncomfortably. The other still held his ground, but his eyes darted around the crowd, clearly realizing the situation had gotten out of hand. The authority they thought they had was crumbling under the weight of the testimonies surrounding them. James didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence was growing taller with every word from these men. Another SEAL joined the others, voice softer but no less powerful. I saw him shield a child with his own body when a bomb went off near a market. That child's mother sent him a letter every year after, thanking him. Because she still has her boy. The emotion in his voice was real. Raw. People were no longer just watching out of curiosity, they were engaged. Some stood to get a better look. Others simply stood out of respect, unable to remain seated after hearing what this man had done. Finally, the sixth SEAL, older than the rest, hair gray at the temples, chest straight and proud, stepped to the center. He didn't speak immediately. He looked at James. Their eyes locked. No salute. No handshake. Just a nod. The kind only warriors understand. Then he turned to the crowd. There's something broken in a society when a man like Sergeant Holloway is asked to leave a public place because of someone's discomfort. When fear wins over decency. When we forget what service and sacrifice look like. This man didn't just serve his country, he served people who never knew his name. And he never asked for recognition. He gestured to the rows of graduates. Today, his son walks across that stage. And his father, the man who risked everything for strangers, nearly wasn't allowed to witness it. At that moment, the school principal reached the group. His face was red, eyes wide. "Mr. Holloway," he began, addressing James directly. I sincerely apologize. This shouldn't have happened. This isn't who we are. Please. You are more than welcome here. Let me take you to the front. One of the guards opened his mouth as if to speak, but the principal held up a hand without even looking at him. Enough. Stand down. The guards stepped back, sheepish now, no longer standing with the same firmness. The illusion of their authority shattered. James looked at the SEALs around him. His brothers. The ghosts of missions past. The ones he hadn't expected, hadn't asked for, and yet here they were, standing with him when no one else would. He gave a tight nod. No words. His voice had caught in his throat. Not out of fear, not even rage, but from the sheer weight of being seen after so long. The principal led James to the front row, right at the center. The SEALs followed behind him like a silent honor guard. As they walked, applause began. It started with a few scattered claps, hesitant at first. Then more joined. Then more. A wave of hands and emotion swept across the stands. Students, parents, even staff stood to their feet, clapping with growing intensity. Applause turned to a standing ovation. James didn't smile. He simply sat, back straight, eyes still locked on the stage. But inside, something healed. Not completely, but something. The SEALs remained behind him, taking seats or standing at the back, forming a wall of quiet strength. They didn't come for glory. They didn't speak to be admired. They spoke because their brother had been wronged, and in their world, you never let that stand. On the stage, graduates began to notice the shift in energy. Some looked out into the crowd, recognizing the applause wasn't for them this time. Jordan, James's son, glanced up, and saw his father in the front row. Saw the crowd on their feet. Saw the men standing behind him. His face froze. Then slowly, a smile spread across it. He understood. Jordan turned to one of his classmates and whispered something. The classmate nodded. Another leaned over and passed it along. Before long, the whole front row of students was abuzz. Then, as if rehearsed, though it wasn't, they stood, one by one. The graduating class stood, facing the crowd, facing the man they had just learned about. They clapped, too. It wasn't in the program. It wasn't expected. But in that moment, the school wasn't just celebrating diplomas or GPAs. They were celebrating what it meant to stand for something. What it meant to be honorable, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. And they were recognizing a man who had done exactly that, in ways most would never truly understand. James Holloway sat quietly, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes, though none fell. He didn't need to cry. The weight of the moment was enough. His brothers had spoken. The crowd had heard. The room had been silenced, not by anger, not by shame, but by truth.